Hello everyone and welcome to this session of Imbibe Live online, part of Global Bar Week. I'm Millie Milliken, Deputy Editor at Imbibe UK, and today we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion and what meaningful actions the hospitality industry can take to be more inclusive. I am over the moon to be joined today by Cressida Lawler, General Manager at London Cocktail Club, Lorraine Copes, founder and managing director of Bayman Hospitality, Dino Moncrief, owner of Hatcher Bar and a general agave spirits expert, and last but by no means least, Yannick Benjamin of Contento Restaurant all the way from New York and co-founder of Wine on Wheels. Hi everyone, how are you doing today?
Hello. Good, thank you.
Really good, well. Thank you. Very good.
Great. Now, before we begin, just a quick reminder to everyone watching that we are live, so we'll be taking audience questions throughout the session today. So please make sure you keep them coming by entering them in the box to the right of the screen, and I will try my best to get through as many as possible, as we only have an hour for this session today. And there's also a poll to get involved in. So do take part in that, and we'll reveal the results of that at the end of the session. So to get started, would you all mind just giving our viewers some context around what kind of work you each do around hospitality and making it a more diverse and inclusive space? And once you've done that, if you could let me know where you think we are as an industry when it comes to the specific issue that you're working on. And I thought, Lorraine, it would be great if we could start with you, please.
Sure. Bayman Hospitality is a not-for-profit organisation. Our mission is to drive education, it's to amplify voices, it's to build community and ultimately accelerate racial equality within the sector. And we do that through three key pillars. We host events, we host or run learning and development initiatives. So we currently have a mentorship scheme, and we also forge partnerships with businesses within the sector to educate, train, and develop their understanding and knowledge on all things race equality, anti-racism, and inclusion. In terms of where I believe we are at the moment, I think we're very early in the journey. I think that, I felt compelled to set Bayman Hospitality up because I myself have worked in the sector for 18 years at a senior level. And when I look to my left and my right, there are never any other people of colour in those rooms. And that has been consistently the case throughout my 18-year career.
And Dino, if you could just give our viewers some context as well. Obviously, this year specifically has been a big year for you in what you're doing to help with racial diversity. If you could just explain, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm similar to Lorraine as well. That it's been a bit of a busy year trying to, it's a hard one to explain what's happened because I'm thinking about something personal that's happened to me in this journey as well. It's been really just raising awareness through an independent platform that I set up called Equal Measures. And the platform itself is based around raising, similar to Lorraine, a lot of education side of things. Three very specific pillars that we look at from an education point of view. That's literally just driving more awareness, and how do we get a wider representation of people of colour to actually be part of this fantastic industry that we have, because I think that there's a massive underrepresentation of people of colour and from diverse backgrounds when you when you sort of work for a big corporate company, as I have done, but also independently as well. I've been quite fortunate. I've travelled all over the country really, and seen many different bars, big hotel groups, small independents, etc. But I feel that there's a real, there's not a balance of where people of colour are actually showing up in the hospitality industry. And I think for me, I'll talk about the three pillars in a second of what I sort of really focus on. But the main driver for me was making sure that there was a little bit more transparency in what people do and how some people can and companies can obviously just tick the equality box and say, well, we are quite diverse because we do have people of a disability, we do have people of a certain ethnic background, you know, and they can tick those boxes, but then you kind of think about, well, where are those people working? You know, what's the representation of people in senior management positions? How many people are actually, you know, front of house, if it is a hotel, that are working that are people of colour? So I felt quite passionate about this, and I had many many incidents that I could recall that really motivated me to set up equal measures. And as I say, 3 pillars that I looked at specifically, education being the key one, recruiting a lot more people in, but then secondly, thinking about, you know, how do we engage the community itself and bartenders? So there's something that we're running for Black History Month, which we can talk about a little bit later on. And then thirdly, it's about how do we all then get out to the communities that really matter to try and bring people in, which is something that I'm looking at doing next year. So yeah, there's quite a lot. Where do I feel that we are? It's a long answer, sorry. But where do I think that we are at the moment? I think it's a journey that we could be doing a lot more. I think that platforms like today are hugely, hugely important. And I would say, you know, a massive thanks to Imbibe for actually having this conversation, because if you think about it, one of the things that really stands out in my mind in all the trade shows that we go to, and all the many different trade shows all around the world, how many stands or seminars do you see that actually talk about people first? There's such a focus on brands making money, bars making money, but what about the people? That's what I think is massively important. So there's a huge amount to be done. And this is, you know, a great first step in raising awareness.
Thank you. And Yannick, it'd be great to hear from you about what you do with Wine on Wheels.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wine on Wheels is the fundraising arm for a nonprofit that I co-founded with my partner and friend, Alex Ilagudin, called Wheeling Forward. And how that all came about was I was in a car accident in 2003 that left me permanently paralyzed. Oh, by the way, full disclaimer, I'm from New York. So if you can tell, I don't sound as fancy as you guys. So sorry about that. But yeah, you know, really the main reason why we started this nonprofit was while we were in rehabilitation, both Alex and myself, we both come from a family of immigrants. Both of my parents are from France. Both of his parents are from Russia. And we just realized that we had this incredible network of support, love, and care. We knew that we had someone at our disposal that we could call up at 2 a.m. in the morning and say, can you bring us food? While the other individuals who had just gotten injured as well, whether it was a car accident or some, you know, act of violence or something other that was random, they did not have that same kind of support. And they certainly didn't know where they were going to go once rehabilitation was over. So we were there for a couple of months. Both Alex and myself, though we come from working class families, we did have the financial resources to be able to do home modifications, small ones, but go a long way, making the doors wider, putting grab bars in the bathroom. These individuals did not have that, and they all went to nursing homes. And as far as I'm concerned, nursing homes are a place where you just go to die in many ways. I mean, it's just there to babysit you. It's just a terrible place that you become institutionalized. And so creating Wheeling Forward, creating Wine on Wheels, the engagement of chefs here in America, in New York City primarily, and sommeliers and mixologists to raise money for this cause for people with disabilities, but primarily people with disabilities that come from financial stressful backgrounds. That's who we really wanted to help. And those are sort of the forgotten people. Unfortunately, our social welfare system here in America is not great. And we currently have a leader that's running this country who's currently trying to get rid of pre-existing conditions as a mandate to get insurance. I mean, these are the times that we're living in right now, and it's very challenging. Yet we have the largest minority group here in America, which is people with disabilities, but yet we are still continually being ignored and forgotten, and it's not a good feeling. And particularly within that segment, people that are continually struggling, especially with COVID right now. And that's a problem. And we're trying to fix it, but it is a long journey and it is very complex, Millie.
Sounds it. And Cressida, if you could talk to us about the work that you do at London Cocktail Club. You guys are known in the industry for being fantastic when it comes to inclusion and diversity training within the team. If you could just give our viewers a bit of context around that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So worked for London Cocktail Club for almost 5 years now, so it's been a long time. So basically my role as a general manager is obviously you're generally managing stuff, but when it comes to sort of LGBTQI issues, I represent the company at events and all other kinds of things, but I'm also very much an ear for the staff of the company, between them and head office. So whether there's sort of like issues between sort of things that go in our bars, or whether it's customers or whatever else, it's about kind of making it an environment where you can completely be yourself and not feel judged for it, because you never should. And the great thing about London Cocktail Club is, especially with like the hiring process and how sort of everyone who comes in, you can be behind one of our bars and feel like you completely belong there, and that you're backed by your managers, you're backed by the staff you work with, and you're also backed by your head office as well. So people like James Hopkins and JJ, they are two people who really sort of are big advocates for it as well, and they always have been. And so with my time there, it's always been having those conversations of what can we be doing better, like, you know, how do we make this more inclusive, and how do we make our staff feel more comfortable? Because as time has gone on, especially for those in the LGBTQI plus community, things like gender is something that's constantly changing, and so is sexuality, and also all the terms. And as we have this conversation, the conversation expands, you need to constantly be rethinking your policies and constantly be communicating with others as well. So if you have, so if you think about 30 years ago, coming out as trans was a massive thing, and it wasn't something that many people accepted when it always should have been accepted. And now today is when you know, if you come out as trans or genderqueer or non-binary or anything like that, it's about being in a working environment and being able to feel that you're supported, and that everything is put in place for you to feel like you can come into work and not feel like anything's changed, but just feel like you've been accepted. So a good example is we had someone come out recently, and they came to me first, and I was like, "Cool, what do you want done?" And they're like, "I'm not sure." I'm like, "Would you like your till names changed? Do you want your payroll changed? Do you need your name changed? Do you need anyone briefed, etc.? Whatever you want, we'll make you feel comfortable, because you obviously see your family, and that's how it should be." And so my role is basically that, just sort of helping look after sort of queer staff, and making sure that the communication is constantly there between them and head office, and that we can always change, improve, and we're constantly pushing for more. Wow. And what I think we are, well, compared to where the LGBT community was years ago to where we are now, obviously it's a massive improvement. There's always more to do. I think if we're looking at sort of mainstream bars, sort of big name bars and stuff, they always have great sort of diversity policies, etc. But if you're looking at sort of further afield, like pub companies, small places, you don't usually get that kind of training, and you also have people who aren't educated in these issues, and so there is still a lot more work to do, and there are a lot more conversations to be had.
Definitely. And obviously these issues aren't singular issues at all, but there are specific barriers when it comes to each of the communities that you guys are talking about today, especially when it comes to working in the hospitality industry. I mean, Lorraine, in terms of the BAME community, are there any specific barriers that you think are the main ones when it comes to people going into the hospitality industry that they still face now in 2020?
I would say that it would be difficult for me to answer, just because BAME is not a homogenized group of people in that respect. But what I would say is that the sector absolutely does have representation, has representation ahead of diversity within the UK from a population percentage. The single biggest issue is not getting into the sector. It's what you're able to do when you get there, quite simply.
Yeah.
And, you know, for I think every single company I've ever worked for will openly celebrate their diversity. But what they fail to acknowledge is that, especially when it's ethnic diversity, they are in junior roles, either within head office or within the restaurant itself. So it's not a barrier to entry, it's a barrier to progress upwards. I see being the single biggest issue, but that is supported by inclusive cultures, because there has to be a level of understanding and businesses adapting in order for everyone to feel as though they belong in an environment. And so the term D&I is often bandied around, but actually I think that the inclusion and belonging piece is super important, because you can tick a box on diversity, but if people do not feel as though they belong in an environment, they don't stay. But what we also know is that diverse leadership teams attract diverse workforces, and that continues on throughout the business.
Yeah, it's a top-down approach, definitely.
Absolutely starts at the top.
With that. Dino, have you got any further thoughts on that as well? I think before we've discussed sort of mentorship and that, do you want to maybe sort of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think Lorraine made some really valid points, and I guess, you know, there's a couple of things on this. I think Christina touched on this as well. For me, what support systems are in place to help people? You know, if you do sort of go, hey, there's a problem here, this is happening. You know, who do you go to? What's the support system that's in place? What are the next steps? And that's always a challenge. If you do feel, because if you're not in a diverse group in the first place, who, you know, how do you know who to reach out to? And how do you build that sort of sense of trust? I think is massively important. But communication obviously being really key to that. But I also would question particular companies of how they actually, you know, there's a lot of companies that we know, big and small, that will have some sort of diversity and inclusion sort of program in place. But my question would always be, how are you measuring the success, and what does success look like? What is a successful diversity and inclusion program? And how does that actually benefit your team? Because if you can't answer that question, then it's not working. The other thing is, who actually set up the diversity and inclusion program that you have in place? Was it set up by somebody who's not from a diverse background at all? You know, what from any of the, you know, from any of my fellow panelists as well. I think that, you know, if our group's not represented by people who are making these programs and setting them up, then how do we know that it can be a success? So there's a few things that are, you know, that are obviously really important to understand, and transparency is absolutely key in that. I think that, you know, businesses, small and large, have a responsibility to be really transparent about what they are doing and how they're doing it and what success looks like, and to share those. You know, you can't just have a diversity program in place and then not share what it does and how it improves and how you support people. There needs to be that evidence there as well. It needs to be evidence-based as well. So I think there's a few things that are, you know, that are massively important, but certainly the barriers, you know, the barriers that exist are there, as Lorraine mentioned. But I'm just sort of trying to champion the fact that with my platform, Equal Measures, is the fact that we need to have more people in our great hospitality industry that reflects society. It needs to mirror the society that it serves. You know, hospitality needs to mirror that, and it's whether it's people of you know, disability or LGBT community, it has to reflect every single person that makes up a wonderful multicultural society, right? Because otherwise, then hospitality is not doing its job. Who's responsible for that is a $1 million question, but it's going to take collective work to get to where we need to get to.
Agreed. And Cressida, in terms of the LGBTQ community, what are the specific barriers that you think are there at the moment for them in terms of hospitality?
I think sort of the big barriers are the education. Like you'll have a lot of companies that will have a policy on diversity and also sort of how to treat people, and it's mainly used as a box ticking thing for compliance, and it's not actually pushed into the company's ethos. The company I work for, it's very much pushed into our ethos, which is fantastic. But like there are places that just will be like, okay, cool. Like we have queer people in our company, right? What should we do? Cool. Let's have like a little training program. Let's do one session on diversity. We'll get everyone in. We'll just do the one session. And then like a year will pass, 2 years will pass, they'll have staff turnover, and then that session won't really mean much anymore because they won't follow up with it, they won't go back to it, and they won't sort of keep the ball rolling, which needs to constantly happen for things to improve or change. You can't just, I think it's sort of equivalent being like, oh, I'm going to learn to swim. So you take one swimming lesson, you're like, I can swim now. You can't, like, you know, you want to go do like a race or something. It's definitely sort of what Dino was talking about. You need to follow up constantly. Like, you know, you need to follow up. You need to make sure that this conversation is always happening. And so I think that's a big issue. I also think that like, I think homophobia in the workplace can also be a really, really big issue that people do not talk about enough. And that is still there, and you do still see it. And there needs to be things in place of like what to do when you see that happening, because it is a hate crime and it needs to be dealt with properly and have actual disciplinary actions, and not just disciplinary but education as well, because you can tell someone off for doing something that's wrong, but the only way they're not going to do it again is if you educate them as to why it's wrong, and to also make everyone feel involved that something has been done and something is done and it's followed up on. So I think that is some big issues that we face in our community, is just making sure that like if you say you're going to do something or have these programs in place, that you follow through with it and you follow up with it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Yannick, from the point of view of hospitality and how accessible it is to people who are disabled, what are the main barriers for that? And, you know, we're talking about physical disability, but mental as well. What do you think are the main barriers there?
Without a doubt, the biggest shortfall that we have here in hospitality in the States is insurance, medical insurance. And so if you have a disability where it requires that you need a certain amount of supplies on a monthly basis, or if you have some kind of condition and you need coverage for that medication, you're going to really consider where you're going to work at, which actually limits your growth. You know, if we had socialized medicine, if we had, you know, more support of the government, I think you would see more people with disabilities out and about working. And also there would be more visibility with people with both physical, cognitive, mental disabilities in the workforce, particularly in hospitality. But even if you're able-bodied and you're completely healthy, you have no issues whatsoever, you know, you're lucky if you have a good insurance plan provided by either a hotel or a restaurant, you know. Again, here in the States, we do have a form of a social kind of a welfare, which is Medicaid, right? And so Medicaid is what you would get on if you meet the income requirements, right? Or if you have a long-term disability, but it's very restricting. So when you're on Medicaid, it pays for everything. It pays for all your medicine that you need, all your supplies. But what it does is it says, well, if you get married, then that counts as income because your spouse is making money. If you have more than $2,000 in your bank account, then you no longer qualify for Medicaid. So the incentive of having to go back to work is simply not there. So people live in fear of having to lose this because it's, well, do I go back to work or do I lose this really important healthcare coverage that I need to survive? And that's the dilemma that we live in. And that's a dilemma that most people with disabilities, again, whether it's visible like myself, because I'm a full-time wheelchair user, or it's someone that has an invisible disability that they have to deal with. And no one should have to deal with. Actually, we have proven by metrics to show that if people had Medicaid, if they had a backup plan, you know, a safety net, people would go back to work. They would be a productive member of society. Instead, we have chosen to make people basically hermits in their own homes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. Hopefully on November 3rd, we will have some news and things will happen. And this new administration, if they do get elected, if they do come in, we will see that happen. But, unfortunately, I have to say, I do remain pessimistic, but there's a side of me that's just crossing my fingers.
And, obviously we're all talking about different issues when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but these issues aren't separate to each other. And I think when we've been speaking before, a lot of these barriers that come up, like education, like measurement, they come up again and again. And that covers the whole of diversity and inclusion. And just sort of opening to the floor, do you think that employees in hospitality look at diversity and inclusion like that? Or do you think they segregate it into sort of racial diversity, LGBTQI, disability? Or do you think they look at it as a whole, as they should do, really? That's open to the floor if anyone wants to comment.
I personally don't think that they look at it collectively or as a whole with separate measures. So, what I can say, again, for many organisations that I've either worked for or know very well, they've always had gender diversity targets, very specific gender diversity targets.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, when I hear the mention of gender diversity targets, I don't think of myself, because typically it's white women that have that opportunity as far as 50-50 in leadership roles. So they absolutely do segment it, they have heavily focused on gender diversity from my personal experience. And I do think that, if you stand for equality, you want fairness and representation for all. And, our name is Bayman Hospitality, but as a result of us driving the agenda of marginalized communities, we don't want anyone else to be disproportionately impacted by that. It is about general and broad fairness. But going a step beyond that, I think it's important to note that ethnicities within the community that I represent are also in some ways disproportionately impacted by prejudice, by bias. And it's understanding that to ensure that, the ideal is that we live in a meritocratic environment where, as hard as you work and the rewards that you reap are just a direct correlation to the work that you put in. And that's sometimes questionable whether that is the case. However, ultimately, I think that not only hospitality as a sector, but the UK as a whole are going for huge amounts of learnings on all areas of equality. And I think the important thing is to focus on how we start to move this forward and actually take some of the learnings from maybe gender equality and the initiatives that have been implemented and delivered successfully and measured, the ongoing measured, because I think something that we've all talked about is the differing degrees of how businesses have implemented or attempted to implement change. What it absolutely has to be in order to remain a consistent business priority is a strategic objective for that business that sits on every agenda at every board meeting and is discussed every single month. And that's ongoing. It's not for the sort of period of June, July and August. It's a really long term, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, for sure.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that at all? Good.
I mean, I'd agree with Lorraine in that. It's something that we spoke about before, and I think you can't be. I would imagine that all of us would agree with this statement. I don't think that any of us individually can look at our personal situation and not be wanting to support the other causes that are there for equality. I mean, that's just how it has to be. The conversations that need to be more present, and I think that what this all comes down to is how much people are prepared to invest in people, whether it is, what does that investment, I'm not talking about like, financial investment, because it can just be time that's invested. Time is just as important as a monetary investment when it comes to ensuring that your workforce your colleagues, and that everyone feels completely and totally secure and safe in the environment that they work. But let's get back to what really actually matters here as well. I think one thing that often gets overlooked with all of this is that we talk about diversity and inclusion. If you ever feel like something has happened to you because of whatever, whatever that situation, whether it's color of your skin, whether it's your sexual orientation, or whether it's because you have a disability, it is the loneliest place to be in a workplace. It is terrible. It's isolating. You feel literally like, where do I go here? And so that it's the mental impact that it can have as well. And I think we should never forget that, and how and that's what I say about investing in people. That's why it's so important that the, people who are in positions of responsibility take it seriously and really do think about investing in everyone equally. I think that's absolutely key for me.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I don't want to touch on it too much in the session. I think we're all bored about talking about coronavirus. But in terms of the barrier that puts up as well, in terms of diversity, I mean, it's been reported, ethnic minorities and disabled people have been disproportionately affected by COVID when it comes to redundancy and getting work on the virus itself. Do you think that COVID in this regard will have ongoing ramifications within the hospitality industry and affect people being hired into it as well? Yannick, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that at all.
Well, sometime in March, I myself got very sick with COVID, and my wife as well. We both lost our sense of smell and taste and went through the whole drama of it all. But I certainly was in a blessed position and definitely had the privilege of having good resources to get help, doing video chats with my doctors and all that. A lot of other individuals that we help at the nonprofit that have a disability simply didn't have those resources, who got very sick, some who passed away, unfortunately, because they had a compromised immune system. As you probably see from the news, I mean, from a global perspective, obviously a lot of things have been mishandled with this virus, particularly here in our country. It has been a disaster. New York City overall has made an incredible comeback. We have done a great job, but we're still trying to understand what the future of hospitality will be to work hand in hand with COVID-19. I'm back at work I work at a private club too. We have about 5,000 members, and it is, I'll tell you, it's weird serving guests. I've got the mask, I got the gloves, and I get it and I understand it, because it's all about, providing the perfect safety net for those guests that we're receiving. Of course, there's nothing better than to see the engagement of someone's smile, their eyes, the face, and all that kind of stuff. But it is going to be very challenging, and a lot of people are convinced that I talk to who say, yeah, everything will go back to normal in 6 months or whatever. I do firmly believe, just like 9/11 had long-term ramifications on how we travel and that have stayed in place, the same thing's going to happen to COVID. And the truth is, there needs to be a new normal. Whatever we were doing before needs to be forgotten. It needs to be imploded, and we need to move forward. And there were a lot of things that we were doing wrong in the restaurant business, in the hospitality industry. We prided ourselves as being a successful restaurant with a 10% net profit. 10% net profit. That's what was considered highly successful, and pertaining to this conversation, even in New York City, where we're like one of the most multicultural, diverse cities in the world, you would go to a lot of top restaurants and still everybody looked like me, so, things need to change, and there needs to be a new normal. There shouldn't be like, oh yeah, things are going to go. No, that normal that we had I don't want to go back to that anymore.
Yeah, a time for change.
Yeah, and to add to that, you know, I've got two schools of thought. The first is I've had many encouraging conversations with business leaders that have said to me that they've taken this time to rethink their business, rethink all areas of their business, from service to food to operations, but also to inclusivity. So there are a number of business owners that have reached out to me directly and that are or have used this time where sales are not as buoyant as they once were to reset and revisit all aspects of their business so that when things do get back to this new normal, they are better than they were before, which is super and amazing. Yeah. But those businesses that are not yet on the train or not yet even there as far as recognizing there's a problem to address, it absolutely will disproportionately and continue to disproportionately impact people from BAME backgrounds and disabled people as well. And so, you know, we see it as our responsibility in the social enterprise, not-for-profit that we are, that we will look at ways in which we can support those communities, either with training, helping them to find work, or redeploying them to a different sector. Because the reality is there are certain sectors that have been, you know, really badly hit, more so than others. And so it may well be the case that some individuals have to reconsider their career path in the short term to ensure that they can afford to survive and live.
Definitely. And just moving on to kind of the practical things that businesses can do, you know, like you say, Lorraine, people have had time to rethink their business, how they run things, how they operate. It would be great to get from you guys some really kind of practical tips that people who might be watching this can take away and use as kind of an arsenal of knowledge to put into their business, either when they reopen or as they're reopening. I know, Cressida, obviously you guys have got a great program of training. Are there kind of a few things that you think off the bat, if people don't have that sort of training in-house, they can start implementing straight away?
I think if you don't have that training in-house, what you should be doing is going off and educating yourself. But when it comes to educating yourself, go and do your research, but also make sure you talk to your staff, constantly asking them what their views are, but don't do it in a way where they feel uncomfortable to tell you how they really feel. And if you think they're not comfortable with talking to you face to face, give them means of doing it anonymously, so that you can have their honest opinions and honest answers, so that you can implement the change that they want and need, and then you can follow up a few months down the line and see if it's working and see if you can build on that. So basically the bare bones of it is communication and asking, and also admitting that you don't know everything and that you need to go off and learn these things to make it a better environment. So education's everything. Self-education is a big one.
Perfect. And Dino, I know with Equal Measures, you've got some kind of more practical things within, like you were talking earlier, of what you're doing with that to get people to actually act and be more diverse within their business. Could you maybe just talk us through those things that you've been doing, especially around Black History Month as well?
Yeah, sure. I think so. The initiative that I set up was a really simple one where I've spent quite a lot of time looking at menus, cocktail menus and drinks menus in general, and I've always found that there's been, you know, the different themes that people use, and the level of creativity with menu creation is amazing at the moment, and in the last couple of years in particular it seems to have excelled. However, what is really noticeable is that none of the menus that I've seen really had any sort of representation of, or any talk of any being inspired by anyone of person of color. And if you think about it, there's, you know, I've seen menus created from, you know, cartoon characters to Marilyn Monroe to Bugsy Malone to movies to everyone. But and you think about this, and you think about the positive social impact that Black society has had, or people of color that have had on society throughout the years, and it's really surprising. And it was an obvious, gap for me that I just thought, why isn't anyone sort of done this? So it was a real simple initiative. I just said to people, I'm asking you, if you love creating cocktails, to create a cocktail that's been inspired by a person of color, to just post it on social media throughout Black History Month, and tell us why that person, that person's story relates to you and how you feel there's a connection. And hopefully it will just raise awareness around some people that often get, that go under the radar and don't get sort of called out as being inspirational. So it's a really simple thing, but, just using the hashtag equal measures. I mean, I've had a really great response, to be fair. A lot of hashtags and a lot of people drawing me to it's interesting as there's been a lot of musical side of things as well, a lot of musical influences, but then also people just had I said I'd wanted this to be open. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be a key worker, for example, anyone who you feel has had a positive impact to society. And I think that's kind of nice to recognize people as well, not just people of the past, but people from the present that are doing positive stuff. So that was a really important thing to me to do, to just keep the conversation going, to keep people talking about, the people of color that have had a positive impact to society, to keep, to make people go, oh yeah, actually, I've never thought about that, or I've never thought about that person. And maybe that will give some inspiration. Maybe at some point, we'll see more menus that are inspired by really key, amazing people that nobody really knew about. So that was it.
I was hoping. And Lorraine, from a seniority perspective, and making sure that there's more representation at the top of businesses, like you mentioned, what do you think needs to be done to change that?
I think the list is really as long as my arm, but I'm going to give you two.
Right.
The first is to really truly understand the current culture of the business that you're running. Yeah, because in order to really address something, you've really got to understand the starting point. So understanding your culture and the views of your current employees is super important. The second is you deliver what you measure, right? Yeah. There has to be accountability and tangible targets attached to anything that you do. My third suggestion, actually, I have a third suggestion, which is around broaden the voices that broaden your horizons on the types of people and the narratives that you are able to tune into. Now, something that we do at Bayman Hospitality is we run events every month, and events to drive education and to create understanding. So for Black History Month, we have 2 events, digital events. They're free to attend, and we will be talking to leaders within the hospitality sector, and it's called Black in Hospitality. There's an ongoing education that needs to happen. And if you're sitting in your boardroom and everyone looks like you, there are no diversity of voices or thoughts, just broaden your horizon. So that's something that anyone can do at any level. And that is definitely going to help move the needle forward.
Great, thank you. And Yannick, I know that we're in the process of opening a restaurant at the beginning of the year, which obviously had to come to an end due to COVID. What sort of things were you planning on doing in starting that business to make it an inclusive environment for anyone who wants to come and work for you, or indeed your guests?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. So, the restaurant was very simple. I mean, I was going to work in there. I mean, it's going to open sometime in mid-November, but the key is very simple: to keep it barrier-free, meaning that someone with a disability can go in there and feel welcomed and not feel intimidated. One thing that I've learned and talking to people in our community, in the disabled community, is they don't go out to eat because they have the fear and anxiety of having to get there, and there might be steps, or you go there and if you're hard of hearing, the music's too loud and then you can't talk to your guest that you're with. So we take all of those into consideration. Part of the bar is lower down. There's like counter seating, so I could just roll up and have a cocktail, so the bar is not high. We want to try to make sure that we have QR codes, obviously one for COVID, but also for people that are blind, right? So they can actually just QR scan it and they can have the menu read to them. No one wants to have the menu read back to them. They want to feel independent. So those little steps are important. Also, secondly, most importantly too, it's not just for disabled people, but it's for people of all backgrounds. You know, I want to make this place very inviting. We're in East Harlem, which is predominantly a Black and brown community, and there's a lot of restaurants that have gone out there and opened, but their doors are still not open for that Black and brown community. I personally have made sure that I've talked to other individuals that live, that are born and raised in that community, asked them for ideas, you know, really try to build strong relationships with them, and making sure that I'm showing a cultural respect of that neighborhood and to the individuals that live there. You know, I think the most important thing is to recognize your privilege, you know, how you can use that and share those resources to those that have less than us, but also have empathy too. You know, oftentimes we forget, you know, empathy goes a long way. Understanding what other communities are going through and what you can do better for them will help enhance your restaurant and enhance that model. I mean, there's tons of statistics and tons of metrics that have been done where for too long we have ignored the disabled people. They bring money, disposable income to the restaurant, but if you don't make it inviting for them or the Black and brown community, they're not going to support your business. That's just the bottom line. It's a win-win situation for everybody.
Well, I look forward to seeing what the restaurant's like in November when you open. Good luck. But I think anyone opening a business at the moment has got a very tall order on their hands. And I've got a question here from someone watching. It goes back to that question of measurement, and they asked, the key for the gender diversity agenda has always been measurement. Programs can be enacted when you can measure it. How can we do that for all of D&I? So how can you actually do that? I don't know if Lorraine or Dino or Yannick, you have any thoughts on that specifically?
One thing I'm well aware of is a lot of companies within hospitality don't have the data. So you need to get the data.
Okay.
And then the procedure is very similar, but it has to be tweaked in accordance to who you're dealing with within those, whether that be ethnic minority. I think there's a real necessity for understanding of the group that you're trying to help to move forward. But you know, a measurement's a measurement, right? Once you understand what your makeup of your employees are, then that makes it, say, easier to do. It's a starting point.
Great, thank you. That's a really great point. And you know, it's very difficult to look into the future at the moment. I think we've all been trying to look into a crystal ball for the last 9 months or so. But in terms of where you hope, you know, we began this session talking about where the industry is at the moment. Do you have in mind where you would like to see the industry be in, say, a year or 2 years' time when it comes to this? That can be in terms of, like you say, Lorraine, people doing more measurement of things, more mentorship. Is there anywhere specific that you would like to see the industry doing in a year's time, and that's just sort of common practice for them? Cressida, I don't know if there's anything that you think of off the top of your head.
I think more bar groups, either independent small bar groups actually having proper policies for diversity and following up with it, and having the stats to prove it, and also the staff that will come and speak on their behalf because of it. More of that, definitely. Great.
Dino?
I mean, I think actually what would be a real success story is that if in a year's time or 2 years' time, there are more people feeling comfortable in their own personal situation, whether they're gay, lesbian, black, white, disabled, or whatever it is, that more people are feeling comfortable in their working environments. And that they're aware that they have a support system around them, that should anything go wrong, they have someone that can actually be there to support them through it. Because I feel that for me is the biggest challenge. If you've ever experienced racism in life, you'll understand how terrible it is. If you've experienced it at work, you'll know just how magnified that is, because you're then sort of, you know, dealing with a situation where you're at work, feeling vulnerable, feeling isolated, and feeling like you don't belong as part of the group. So I just would love for people to feel more, you know, part of the group and in their work environment. And I started off today sort of kind of thrown a little bit because I just went back to a situation that had happened to me recently, which I think is probably worth sharing because, you know, at the start of the session, I was like, well, I'm not sure how to actually even start talking about it. But just as recently as a few weeks ago, I got racially abused on a Zoom session that was just hijacked by somebody who had nothing better to do with their time than to you know, to kind of make a pre-recording of vile hate words that were repeated over and over again, and I was specifically targeted for that. So when you think about that happening when you're in a Zoom session, trying to, you know, just have a chat with other colleagues of our industry, that to me is really disturbing, right? So we need to be at a position where that doesn't happen again, and that's why the education side of things is really important, right? And that's absolute key. So that for me, yeah, that those two things are really, really key. So hopefully nobody experiences what I've experienced, and then everybody can feel a little bit more secure in their environments. That's it.
Thank you for sharing that with us as well, Dino. And Lorraine, what about you?
I would simply say further forward. I think we have to recognise that the challenge that we face is hundreds of years of unpicking to be done. So it's impossible for me to look a year down the line and say where we'll be. My longer term aim is that this business will be redundant and there'll be no need for Bayman Hospitality to exist, because we see representation at all levels. We see, you know, Black, Asian people on in trade press regularly, at exhibitions, in all parts of the sector where they should be and they're currently not. So my longer term vision is for us to not to need to exist. And for that reason, I've got 2 other careers. And so, yeah, it's really longer term because this is a marathon. It's so hugely complex and so huge or deeply rooted that it's not going to be a matter of a year or 2 to make real long-lasting change. This is a long road ahead. But I'd say positively, you know, I've personally engaged with quite a lot of companies within the sector, and companies that I've always been a fan of their brands as well. Amazing restaurant groups in particular that are on the train of moving forward, importantly. So that's a positive step for sure.
Great. And Yannick, I mean, hopefully in a year's time, your new restaurant will be thriving. What do you think in terms of the industry when it comes to sort of disabled workers? Are you hoping to see more of that or more inclusivity in general?
Yeah, well, first off, I tell anyone who's, you know, during or leading the interview process, just remember that the person sitting right in front of you could possibly be the next Stephen Hawking, right? Imagine the world without Stephen Hawking, right? And so there's so much potential. Every single individual has so much potential to give. It is our job to just kind of peel that onion and provide the resources so their potential can be really shown. And I think that's what we really need to do. And I know that, you know, if I myself I'm leading the interview process and I'm getting, you know, 30 applications and they're all 30 applications by white males, that's my job to say, why am I only getting 30 applications by white males? I need to go figure this out. And here, there's so many great organizations that have been started, Wine Unify, Black Wine Professionals. Then it's my job at that point to reach out and say, hey, you know, I didn't receive any applications from this community. Could you help me out? Or what do I need to do? And and that's what we need to do. You need to also do your homework. You also need to like really reach over the aisle and not just let it come to you, because that's just true laziness at the end of it all.
Agreed. I think that's a great note to end on, and something that people can implement straight away in their hiring process. Just before we end quickly, had a quick look at the poll. Does your employer company do enough to make their business inclusive of all communities? The overwhelming answer is yes, they're excellent. The next one is no, not at all. So, I mean, that shows completely both sides of the coin. So I think it's that middle ground where, you know, people really need to start implementing things, and hopefully we'll move towards a far more inclusive and diverse industry as a whole. But from Imbibe's point of view, this is a topic that we want to continue talking about on a regular basis. Like you say, it's not a you do one thing and then you've covered it. So obviously anything we can do to help you guys, please let us know. And just so everyone watching can find you all on socials, Lorraine, it's at Bayman Hospitality.
It is. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, all the social channels. So reach out to us if you want to have a conversation. Then we're definitely collaborating for change.
Perfect. And Dino at Equal Measures.
At Equal Measures UK.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And Yannick, you're at Wine on Wheels.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Correct. Awesome. And then LCC is all over the socials as well. And Cressida, I know are you part of Cocktail Cuties as well, which is a Facebook community.
Also in Cocktail Cuties as well.
Perfect. So that's a great Facebook community group for the LGBTQI community, which is fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for your time. We're literally bang on time. As ever, a subject that you can't really put an hour on, but as are the constraints of an online session. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, and Yannick for taking time over schedule and coming over the pond to come and say hi to us in the UK. And thank you to everyone who watched the session as well today at Imbibe Live online, part of Global Bar Week. Again, I'd like to thank all of my guests, and all the sessions will be available to watch on demand straight after this. So tell your friends if they couldn't make it today. And there's a full week of content left, so make sure that you check out the rest of the program as well. Thanks again, guys, and see you soon.
Thank you, Millie.
Thank you.